President.
The senator from Louisiana.
Mr. President, pursuant to the consent agreement, I call up Vitter Amendment number 769.
The clerk will report.
The senator from Louisiana, Mr. Vitter, proposes an amendment number 769 to amendment number 738. On page...
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to waive reading of the whole.
Without objection.
Mr. President, let me briefly explain what this amendment is about, and I'll be very brief. It would allow for personal use drug reimportation from Canada only. And in doing so, Mr. President, this amendment is nearly identical to an amendment I have proposed previously on the Senate floor last Congress, which passed in a very strong bipartisan vote. Mr. President, Americans spend hundreds of billions of dollars a year on prescription drugs, and prescription drug prices are skyrocketing, and they continue to skyrocket. And that causes real hurt and angst among many American families, particularly American seniors. They shouldn't have to choose between life-saving medicine and other basic needs of life like food and electricity. And yet often, Mr. President, the reality is that they do have to make that choice. My amendment would help ease a little bit of this pain by giving Americans more options. But in doing so, Mr. President, it's very narrow, it's very cautious, it's very specific. It applies to only individual consumers, not wholesalers, bringing in for their personal use FDA-approved prescription drugs, and only from one country, namely Canada. As I said, Mr. President, in doing so, the language is nearly identical to the Vitter Amendment to the DHS appropriations bill that passed the Senate last Congress with a strong bipartisan majority, 55 to 36, with 9 members not voting. Mr. President, this would provide real relief to millions of Americans, including seniors. It would allow reimportation from Canada, a very safe source country, including through mail order and over the Internet. The language, again, was restricted to personal use reimportation. Wholesalers cannot participate in this. It only applies to a consumer who gets a valid prescription from a doctor. And so this amendment would specifically prohibit funding to the FDA to the extent that they would crack down on and prohibit and police against this narrow set of activity. Mr. President, back home and in Washington, members of Congress on both sides of the aisle often talk about doing something about skyrocketing prescription drug costs. This is a very specific, narrowly tailored, cautious but effective means where we can do something, where we can have an impact, where we can help tens of millions of Americans, including many vulnerable seniors. So I hope, Mr. President, Democrats and Republicans will come together again, as we did last Congress, and give a strong, healthy, bipartisan majority to this idea. It's the right thing to do. It would help Americans, it would help seniors, and it's a very careful, cautious approach. Personal use only, not wholesalers, Canada only. Again, I urge that we adopt this amendment, Mr. President, and with that, I yield the floor.
The senator from Louisiana.
President, I know that there may be other senators that want to call up their amendments. I only want to speak for 2 minutes on the amendment that I just submitted and just explain to the Senate why this amendment is necessary. And I look forward to working with the chairwoman of the Agriculture Committee, Senator Stabenow from Michigan, and others to work through the details. But it seems as though there's an inconsistency in the law between the 404 process that the Corps of Engineers uses when anyone, public or private, wants to build anything in a wetlands. Of course, you've got to get a permit. We're getting used to that. It's not an easy process, but it works for the most part. You've got to mitigate. In other words, there's a no net loss rule, and we're all supporting that. However, there's a discrepancy in the Farm and Rural Development Act that actually prohibits some very, very worthy nonprofit entities who are building community projects. This is not for-profit, to even apply for a permit, even if they could mitigate. And that's what my amendment seeks to correct. So the chairperson on the Agriculture Committee and others that have jurisdiction have committed to work with me on this to tailor this amendment so that it provides the help that some of these loans need through the Rural Development Agency, but it doesn't open up a whole new area of policy. And I thank the chair, and that's basically a very short but concise and complete description of what I'm trying to do. It's about as simple as that, and look forward when we can, the senator from Wisconsin, when he allows us to get in line for a vote on this committee. And I thank Senator Cole for allowing us to offer this amendment at this time. And I yield the floor.
Senator from Oklahoma.
I ask unanimous consent that the pending amendment be set aside and that amendment number 791 be called up.
Without objection, the clerk will report.
The senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, proposes an amendment numbered 791 to amendment numbered 738. At the appropriate place.
I ask unanimous consent that the amendment be considered as read.
Without objection.
This is a straightforward amendment. We've had a lot of talk about millionaires in the country, but what most people don't realize that there are a lot of farmers in this country whose adjusted gross income is well in excess of $1 million that we're paying direct payments to. And what I would put forward is if you're making over $1 million a year, I really don't think you need a lot of help from the federal government to be profitable. And so what this amendment will do, will put a limit of $1 million or greater from receiving direct payments from the Department of Agriculture. You could say somebody making $980,000 wouldn't, but we've chosen this. Right now it's supposedly $2.5 million adjusted gross income. So what we've done, of those people who make $2.5 million farming, of all the people that make more than $2.5 million, 75% of their income outside of the farming income comes from some other areas. In other words, this is not their main business. Their main business isn't farming. So if they make $2.5 million farming and they make a significant 75% more than that in other areas, again, I would say we should have trouble justifying to the American people that we're sending their tax dollars, actually borrowed money that are going to be charged to their kids and grandkids, that we should be sending those to those individuals. Of the 1.8 million people who received farm payments from 2003 to 2006, 2,702 of them exceeded the income limits that were established at that time, greater than $2.5 million. GAO reported that the USDA does not have management controls in place to verify that payments are not made to individuals that exceed the program's income eligibility limit. So we have a limit of 2.5, but they're not enforcing it. They don't know whether they're enforcing it. So what this amendment is, first of all, we're going to cut it back to $1 million and say put in action so you know who you're paying and how much they're making. GAO found that participants in the program in 2006 were 3 times as likely to have an adjusted gross income in excess of $500,000 as in individuals who did not participate at all in the direct payment program. In other words, 21 of every 1,000 farm program participants reported an excess adjusted gross income of $500,000 or more, compared with 7 of every 1,000 filers in the tax filers in the general public. Instead of taking more of what wealthy individuals have earned, Congress would be wise to first end unsolicited subsidies in the farm program to those individuals. Studies show that direct payments went to wealthy individuals who live in urban areas but own or have partial interest in their farms. In other words, they're absentee landlords who live in U.S. cities with population 100,000 or more, but they were paid $394 million in farm payments in terms of the direct payment in 2010 alone. So that's $500 million. The top 10% of direct payments in 2010 received 59% of the money under the program. In other words, the top 10% got 59% of the direct payment money. These 88,000 people got an average of $30,000. But if you look at those with adjusted gross income, they get far in excess of that. Some examples include 23 members of Congress in the 112th Congress, 195 individuals living inside Washington, D.C., 203 individuals in Miami, 179 individuals inside the city limits of San Francisco received over $1 million in payments. 290 individuals in New York City residents received $800,000 on average in payments. President Obama's fiscal 2012 budget proposes to reduce the per-person cap on direct payments to wealthy farmers by 25% or more and reduce the adjusted gross income eligibility limit by $250,000 over 3 years. Well, what this amendment does is goes in the spirit of what the administration wants to do, but goes further. It just says if you're making over $1 million in adjusted gross income, you should not be eligible for direct payments through the farm program. Straightforward. It's a way for us to change what we're doing. It's a way for us to save a significant amount of money, almost $500 million. And I would dare to say that if you poll the average American and you said we're paying out hundreds of millions of dollars every year to people that are making more than $1 million that are farming, they'd say, we don't agree with that. That can't be the intent of the original intent of that program. That program is designed to help those people who are truly undercapitalized, who truly are having a difficult time, even when we have great markets. And I'm not opposed to the direct payment program, but the fact is to have a significant percentage of that go to individuals that are making far in excess, 33 times what the average individual in this country makes, I think is something that we ought to end, and we ought to end right now. Mr. President, I'd ask that the pending amendment be set aside and amendments number 792 be called up.
Without objection, the clerk will report.
The senator from Oklahoma, Mr. Coburn, proposes an amendment numbered 792 to amendment number 738. At the appropriate place,
I'd ask the unanimous consent the amendment be considered read.
Objection.
This is another fairly straightforward amendment. You know, we have significant housing for people that have a need in our country. But inside that program in HUD, there are payments being made for housing complexes with life-threatening conditions or an absolute poor physical condition. And yet people are trapped there, yet we keep sending the money. The money doesn't go to improve the housing. It goes into the pockets of those that own the housing through the subsidized housing. Thousands of needy families have turned to the government for stable housing. They've been placed in properties with health and safety deficiencies, including some that are life-threatening. There are 3,847 properties with life-threatening, this is life-threatening deficiencies as determined by HUD, life-threatening, that are currently or previously designated as troubled by HUD during the past 5 years. Of these, 2,297 are in poor physical condition that were designated as troubled by HUD. Some of these are for the same properties that appear year after year on HUD's registration list of troubled properties. These numbers won't reflect all of the deficient housing provided by HUD and other federal departments and agencies. So this is just a taste of a portion of what is out there. What this amendment would do would be cut off aid to the greedy slumlords while protecting needy families by prohibiting HUD from making payments for any assisted or insured multifamily housing property currently designated as troubled on the online property integrated information system for life-threatening deficiencies or poor physical condition that has been on this OPUS troubled property list at least one time during the past 5 years. So what we're saying is if you've been taking advantage of the program as the owner of this property and not making it a safe property, not making it inhabitable, yet people have no choice but to live there, then what we're saying is HUD shouldn't be giving you any money. HUD should not be giving you any money. Over the past several years, there's been far too many examples of slumlords receiving hundreds of millions of dollars, federal tax dollars. In many cases, those without stable housing seek help, but were put at health and safety risks by those entrusted to care for them with taxpayer funds. A recent ABC News Nightline investigation concluded the federal government's low-income housing programs are plagued by theft, mismanagement, and corruption at local levels, including millions spent on housing for sex offenders and dead people, and all too often fail the 3 million families who rely on them for a clean, safe place to live. Specifically, the report found Philadelphia Housing Authority spent housing funds on lavish gifts for its executives, $500,000 to settle sexual harassment claims, $17,000 of housing funds to throw an extravagant party for the executives. The same month as a belly dancer party, a 12-year-old girl living in federalized subsidized housing suffered a near-fatal asthma attack that had left her unable to speak or walk that will secondary just to dangerous mold in that apartment complex because it wasn't taken care of with the dollars that were paid by American taxpayers to help those who needed or are dependent on us. The New York Daily News recently found some of the city's worst landlords received $81 million in federal housing funds, even though their buildings are riddled with housing code violations. The report stated millions of dollars have been doled out to buildings where tenants have repeatedly complained rats, roaches, unworking elevators, lack of heat, and flaking lead paint. The federal government provided $300 million to more than 60 housing agencies that have been repeatedly faulted by auditors or for mishandling government aid. In Indiana, investigators found the poor being forced to live in substandard housing that local authorities knew was unsafe, yet did not fix. In Indianapolis alone, more than $5.2 million a year has been spent on housing residents in unsafe conditions, according to the Fort Wayne Journal-Gazette. About $2.2 million of the federal funds intended to support low-income housing of the Navajo Nation Indian lands in Arizona and New Mexico was instead spent on gaming, furs, jewelry, racehorse training, according to the Las Vegas Sun. There's no oversight at HUD to make sure the landlords meet the eligibility requirements for receiving these funds. So what we're actually doing is we're saying, if you don't meet the criteria, you shouldn't get the money. Now, that's hardly a novel idea. And yet, we continue to spend hundreds of millions of dollars supposedly to help those that are neediest among us, but yet doesn't help them at all because the money is misdirected and not reinvested in the housing. HUD continues to subsidize repeat offenders with a history of placing families in unsafe living conditions. There are 6,100 properties designated as troubled during the past 5 years. Some of these entities are the same properties that appear year after year after year on the same list. In other words, no change, they're still getting the money. These include properties in my own state of Oklahoma. Needy families should not be put in dangerous conditions as a result of neglect by the slumlords, but more importantly, results of neglect by our oversight of HUD. So what we would propose to do is to ensure that federal housing benefits for the needy rather than the greedy, and to prevent slumlords from abusing taxpayers and the disadvantaged. This amendment would bar HUD from paying landlords whose properties are in poor physical condition or have life-threatening deficiencies according to their own analysis. In other words, they already know it, but they're still paying them. And so what this amendment would say is you're on the list, you don't qualify. And it'll send a great signal. Not only will we not pay as much money to properties and put people in better properties, but we will change the expectation of the people who are making all the money off the HUD monies for the properties. Will make a big difference. And so there may not be many that actually lose the money, but there'll be many people who are depending on us living in far better conditions, far safer conditions if we pass this amendment. I want to take just a moment, if my colleague doesn't mind, just to talk about where we are for a moment. I have a total of 12 amendments. I was allowed to bring up 2. I understand that they don't want to get in a hurry, but the fact is these are all good government amendments. Every amendment that I brought up, they may not pass, but that's our fault. That's not. But the fact is that we should not be limiting amendments. Let's get them out there. Let's do them. There are money savings. There are quality savings. There are ways to make the agencies work better, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. We stand right now as a nation in the worst shape we have ever been. The risks to our country are great. We need to quit thinking about partisanship. We need to quit thinking about advantage in the political arena and start doing what is necessary to fix our country. We passed a budget bill that allowed a debt increase that the average American doesn't realize that we actually didn't save any money. We're actually going to spend $800 and some odd billion more than what we spent last year over the next 10 years on discretionary programs. It's time we start being honest with the American public. And these 12 amendments are simple and straightforward. One of them copies Senator Mikulski's amendment for CJS that in terms ties down and makes more responsible the agencies on their conference spending. Conference spending is out of control. The Department of Agriculture is absolutely out of control on the money it spends. And so we ought to be about moving things through here that make a real difference so that we can start rebuilding a confidence when the American people, 15% of the people have confidence in us. And I understand why. Because we spend most of our time around here in a quorum call. And we're going to do it. I was prepared to be here tonight to put all these amendments up, see which ones could be taken, not necessarily have a vote on every one, but we're not going to allow that to happen. And we're not going to allow it to happen not for any good reason. We're not going to allow it to happen for political reasons. That's killing our country. And whether Republicans do it or Democrats do it, none of it's any good. The country is on to us. 85% think we're doing a lousy job. I wonder why it's that low. I can't find anybody in the state of Oklahoma that thinks we're doing a good job. And I can't find anybody around the country that thinks we're doing a good job. But I would ask my colleagues, let's start moving stuff through here that actually changes things. It's actually going to make a difference. You know, you don't have to agree, but vote it down. And none of these are trick amendments. None of these are meant to be political amendments. They are just straightforward, good government amendments that we ought to consider. And if you disagree, fine. But let's not vote on them, and let's not make an attempt. Let's not quit making attempts to try to fix what's wrong in our government. HUD's oversight of the housing is a disaster. When we have this many properties year after year on this list, why would we not want to fix that? It's not that we don't want to fix it. It's we don't want to give somebody an opportunity to put out the real reason our country's in trouble. And the real reason is us. We haven't done our jobs. We haven't done the oversight. We haven't cleaned things up. We can have great arguments and great discussions and great debates, but to not have the debate at all means we deserve every bit of that 85% lack of confidence in what we're doing. Mr. President, I would hope tomorrow that I would be able to offer the rest of these amendments. I've talked with almost every one of the managers on the amendments. None of them are controversial. Some they may disagree with and want votes on. Others can be accepted. But to not move forward and then to say it's taken too long to get the bill when we're here ready to work is just not an excuse the American people are going to buy anymore. With that, I yield the floor.
President,
The senator from Wisconsin.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Mr. President,
The senator from Oregon.
Mr. President, my colleague from Oklahoma was addressing the frustration that exists of the American public with this chamber for not doing its job. And I must say on that point we are in complete agreement. I hear in every town hall, in every conversation with constituent, the question of why is it that what we need, when what we need most in this nation are jobs, this chamber, the Senate, is unable to hold a debate over a jobs bill. And just last week, we had a debate not over the jobs bill, but whether to proceed to the jobs bill. And unfortunately, it was defeated. Not because the majority didn't want to get to the bill, but because the minority opposed it and invoked a 60-vote hurdle, a hurdle that was never routinely used in this chamber in the past. The fear of debating a jobs bill in this chamber by my colleagues is irrational. American people want us to wrestle with creating jobs. Have people not gone out and talked to their constituents? Do they not know the unemployment rate in this nation? Do they not hear from the fathers and the mothers who are worried about keeping shelter over their family, who are worried about their mortgage and their rent and their utilities? I don't understand how anyone could say, let's not have a debate about jobs on the floor of the Senate. And yet, it was a unanimous no vote from across the aisle when we proposed having the debate over the jobs bill. I think it's so important that all of us here in this chamber who actually receive a paycheck understand the challenge and the plight of American citizens who either are working part-time in multiple jobs trying to make ends meet, who've lost their job or are completely unemployed. Now, over the last 10 years, we have lost 5 million manufacturing jobs in this country. Over the last 10 years, we have lost 50,000 factories in this country. So working families are in a tremendous crunch. So I thought I'd simply share some stories from back home, because there doesn't seem to be many people listening to folks back home and their concern that this chamber debate and produce a jobs bill and get it to the president. Jerry from Lynn County says, I was laid off in April 2009. It took me 2 years and 2 months to find a contracting job. I appreciate having a job. However, I have no benefits, no holiday pay, no vacation pay, no medical or dental coverage. My wife recently suffered a badly broken leg. We have no insurance. Her injury required surgery and a hospital stay. Now we are in danger of losing the house that I bought in 1993. I am told that my contract has been renewed for another year. That will bring us to May of 2012. Then I have to leave for 3 months before I can return. I am given no promise of being able to return to work there. That's Jerry's story that he sent in to share. Virginia from Hillsborough writes, in February 2010, my department at my company was advised we would be laid off after transitioning our job duties to a replacement staff in India. It felt like quite a blow. Prior to the layoff, the company had not given us raises for 3 to 4 years, even though they were reporting profits. Half of our department was laid off within a few months. I filed a TAA petition to attempt to obtain additional funds or schooling for the people in our department, but it was denied. The year before I was laid off, my daughter, who lives with us with her son, changed jobs and then was laid off from the new job. 4 months after my layoff, my husband was advised the rest of his department is being laid off after their job duties are transitioned to an offshore site. Hopefully, he will have work until March. My daughter, myself, and my husband are all looking for work. We moved my mother up with us 3 years ago, so now we have 4 generations living in our home. I have no idea what will happen if none of us can find work. My husband served his time in the Army, and he and I have always worked full-time, steady jobs. It feels like we're being punished for spending our lives working to take care of our family and to keep a roof over our heads. I read in the papers this morning that things are improving in Oregon, but honestly, I don't see it. Americans are hurting. Americans need jobs. We want to work and need to work. We are not lazy. We are innovators and always have been. We need to regain our pride in our country, help each other, and quit focusing on greed. So that was Virginia from Hillsborough. And if you didn't catch the beginning of her letter, it started by saying that she and her team were laid off after training replacements in India to take over their job, and that this terrible economy is resulting in people in multiple generations of her family without work. Julio from Southwest Portland says, I am 31 years old with my first baby on the way, and I can honestly tell you I am nowhere near where I thought I would be at this point in my life. Upon graduating high school, I joined the Navy. I did a 6-year enlistment. My mother was a housekeeper, my father was an ordained minister, and they were unable to help me with the expenses of higher education. So I took full advantage of the GI Bill once I was discharged, honorably discharged in 2004. I completed my degree in 3 years and 9 months and graduated with a bachelor's in business management and a minor in economics. I strongly felt that as a 6-year veteran of the Navy with a degree in business and being bilingual, I would have no problem finding employment. Unfortunately, I had the misfortune of graduating just as the financial world collapsed in 2008. 3 years later, I worked 2 jobs and still make less than $30,000 a year. I've interviewed for several great jobs, but due to the amount of people applying for the same position, I've lost out to individuals with a greater amount of experience. I know I can do well, but in our current environment, I feel as though I don't even have a chance. Anything you can do to create better paying jobs in Oregon would be greatly appreciated. That was Julio from Southwest Portland. These stories, they're coming from our single parents, they're coming from our husbands, our wives. We're coming from folks who are taking care of their parents. They're coming from folks who are trying to take care of their children. And you can feel the sense of frustration. You can feel the sense of panic in this economy. So last week, this chamber debated whether to have a debate about creating jobs. And my colleagues across the aisle said no. We will not let the jobs bill come to the floor. I must say, I'm extraordinarily frustrated that at this time, in this economy, with so many Americans hurting, my colleagues are unable to summon the connection to the challenge of the American family so that we can have a full debate on this floor on a jobs bill. Well, these families that are writing, as you could tell from the letters, they serve their country. Several of them were in the service. They played by the rules. They worked hard. But they have been let down again and again by a political system that has protected tax breaks for the wealthy over creating jobs and opportunities for working families. So I hope we'll have another chance to decide whether to debate a jobs bill, and I hope every member of this chamber will say yes. Yes to taking and shutting down tax breaks, $20 billion a year for oil companies that are stashing that money in the bank and not creating a single job with it, and taking that $20 billion and putting it to work on energy retrofits, which is, by every economist, the best bang for the buck we could possibly have in creating jobs. Because you can't outsource a single bit of the labor, and virtually all the products are made right here in our economy, from the pink cotton candy insulation to the double-pane windows to the caulk. So that's just one example of the kind of conversation we should be having. We should be having a conversation about whether we should be helping our school districts hire teachers. That's in the bill. Some will agree, some won't. But let's have the debate. If someone wants to propose an amendment and say, no, we don't want to help our school districts, we can do something better to create jobs, then let's have that debate. But let's not sit on our hands while the American families are suffering. Let's get to work and create jobs that the families across America need. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President.
The senator from Tennessee.
Mr. President, we have morning business.
We are.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm delighted that the senator from Colorado is in the chair when I speak, because I want to speak on a subject about which he's the foremost expert in this chamber, at least in day-to-day operations, and that is of school systems. And I think he'll appreciate and understand what I'm about to say in ways that many people will not. Yesterday I had a telephone conversation with a member of the editorial board of a prominent newspaper in this country who asked me this question. She said, Senator Alexander, how could you and the National Education Association possibly be together on the teacher evaluation question? How can you justify that? And then she said, and when has the NEA ever done anything to encourage the evaluation of school teachers? That's a good question. Both questions are good questions. And what she was referring to, of course, was the draft announced yesterday by Senator Harkin and Senator Enzi, who are the ranking members of the Senate committee that handles education. And in it, it included a provision on evaluation of principals and teachers. At my suggestion and that of others, but contrary to the suggestion of a number of people, it does not include an order from Washington that all 15,000 school districts have a teacher-principal evaluation system. It does not include a definition of what it should be, and it doesn't include the opportunity for the education secretary, whomever it may be, to then issue a number of regulations defining what a teacher evaluation system would be in Denver or in Maryville or in Nashville. What it does include is the following. For the first time, it specifically allows a state to spend its Title II money, that's $2.5 billion of federal funds that goes to states. It allows that money to be spent to design and implement a principal-teacher evaluation system that is related to student achievement. Now, in my view, that's the holy grail of public education. If we could ever figure out how to do that and to get everybody to do it, I think it would do more than any other single thing we could do to help our children learn what they need to know and be able to do, except some law that would make everybody better parents. And I don't know how to pass such a law. So that's the first thing the Harkin-Enzi draft includes about teacher evaluation. In Tennessee, for example, that would mean that there would be about $41 million this year that could be spent for that purpose. There are about 63,000 teachers in Tennessee, so that's about $660 per teacher per year of federal funds that could be used to design and implement a principal-teacher evaluation system related to student achievement, and this is the first time that's been specifically allowed. Secondly, there's something in the draft legislation called the Teacher Incentive Fund. Many school superintendents, like the distinguished senator from Colorado, know that fund very well. We know it in Tennessee because of the work in Memphis. Basically, it's a grant that was included as a result of language in No Child Left Behind, and Secretary Spellings then beefed up the program, got the money appropriated, and it recognizes the difficulty of figuring out how to reward and evaluate teachers in a fair way, especially if you're going to base compensation on that. And it says, okay, if you want to do it, we'll give you some money to help you try to do it. And so you can do it one way in Knoxville, another way in Denver, another way in Los Angeles, and hopefully what will happen is over time we'll find lots of fair ways to reward outstanding teaching and determine outstanding teaching, and smaller school districts and other school districts can borrow ideas from one another. That's been a big success, and Secretary Duncan supports it, I support it, has support all the way around. President Obama has supported it. The third thing that's available for helping develop teacher evaluation systems is a program called Race to the Top. $700 million federal dollars in fiscal year 2011. That's a lot of money. And states had to compete based upon among other things, their ability to develop principal-teacher evaluation systems. My state of Tennessee, and I can brag on them especially because I had nothing to do with it, at least recently, won that competition, won $500 million, which is being spent today which has been spent to develop and implement an evaluation program for all the teachers in Tennessee. And then there's another item in this draft which fits in here. I would call it the Secretary's report card. All previous education secretaries, and I'm one of them, have tried to use the bully pulpit. So have presidents. When I was governor of Tennessee and we were working on a master teacher program, President Reagan came to Tennessee to say it was a good idea. That was very helpful to me at the time. He didn't try to say this is how you should do it. He said, I recognize what you're doing, I applaud it and encourage it. And Bill Bennett, when he was the education secretary for President Reagan, went to Chicago and said they had the worst schools in the country. Made a lot of news. But when a secretary uses that bully pulpit, he can make a difference. We have a very good education secretary right now, Arne Duncan, and what he now has at his disposal no one else has had before. He has 8 or 9 years of reporting requirements of schools all across the country, and there are about 100,000 public schools he has this information for. And he can go around the country and say, this is good, this is bad, I'll put the spotlight here, I'll brag on this, let's do more of this. He can do that in a way that nobody ever could before. So this is what is in the draft that we're talking about that would for the first time get the federal government significantly involved in creating an environment for teacher principal evaluation related to student achievement. One is $2.5 billion of federal dollars in Title II. All of it can be used for this purpose if states want to. Teacher Incentive Fund, number 2, that was $399 million this year. Race to the Top was nearly $700 million. And then there's the Secretary report card. I responded to the editor who called me and said, look, I know something about this. In 1983 and 4, when I was governor of Tennessee, we became the first state in the country to create a statewide system for rewarding outstanding teaching and paying those teachers based upon that. At that time in Tennessee, not one teacher made 1 penny more anywhere in the country for being a good teacher. Not one teacher made 1 penny more, was paid 1 penny more for being a good teacher. So that was what we did in 1983 and 84. She said, how hard could that be? She said, everybody knows that some teachers are better than others. We all know that when we put our children into school. Everybody knows that. Why can't we evaluate teachers? How hard could that be? Well, I was a little bit amused by that because those were exactly the same kinds of questions that I was asking in frustration 30 years ago. I would say it to every college of education in the country. I couldn't find a single one that would help me in any significant way evaluate outstanding teaching. Now, that may sound like an overstatement. It's not much of an overstatement. I had dean after dean, education professor after education professor say, you can't do that. You can't determine that one teacher is better than another one, especially if you plan to reward them, compensate them based upon that. I found that patently ridiculous. Patently ridiculous. Just like the editor was trying to say to me, every parent knows that. My mother put me in one first grade instead of another first grade in Maryville, Tennessee, because she thought one teacher was better than the other. She had an opinion about that. She was a teacher herself, so perhaps she knew. We all have those judgments to make. And IBM hires a lot of education people, and they have teachers, and they know some are better than others, and they pay them correspondingly. Colleges and universities hire a lot of teachers. They pay teachers all the way up the ladder, from lower amounts to very high amounts for distinguished professor. They can find a way to make a distinction, but somehow we've gotten in this rut 30 years ago that said we can't make any distinction among teachers based upon their ability to teach, especially related to student achievement, and then we especially can't take the next step and pay some more than others. The reason I thought that was such an urgent problem 30 years ago was that we can't trap women in our schools anymore to teach. Women are in the marketplace now. That's what we did for many, many years. So if we want to attract and keep the very best men and women teaching in our classrooms, we need to be able to recognize excellence when we find it, to encourage it, and to reward it with compensation. I can remember sitting around with a group of governors in 1980 when the late Bill Clement, the governor of Texas, said to mostly a group of Democratic governors, when is one of you, and he used another word, so-and-sos, going to get the courage to take on the NEA? And what he meant was every single one of us knew that the National Education Association had its foot on everyone who tried to pay some teachers more than others. Well, you know, I was young and maybe didn't know better, so in my second term, I created a bipartisan commission with the Democratic leaders of the legislature, and we set out to figure out a number of things about education, including a master teacher program. Well, the long and short of it was we did that. It took a year and a half of my time as governor. I must have spent an hour, 40 or 50 minutes, percent of my time every day engaged in an ongoing brawl, mainly with the National Education Association, as to whether we could do this or not. They defeated my proposals in the first year. I came back the second year and won by one vote. And we put in place a voluntary program that, before long, up to 10,000 Tennessee teachers voluntarily went into a career ladder program, became master teachers. Many got 11-month and 12-month contracts and 10-month contracts. It raised their pay, it improved their retirement, it gave them distinction, and I have teacher after teacher come to see me today to thank me for that, including the current leadership of the Tennessee Education Association, whose organization killed the program after I left office. So it's appropriate to ask, Senator Alexander, why are you and the National Education Association in cahoots on any sort of teacher evaluation proposal? Well, I wanted just to say briefly here why. A lot has happened since 1983-84. Governor Hunt, Democratic governor of North Carolina, and others have worked to create the Board of Professional Teaching Standards. The NEA and the American Federation of Teachers both participated in that. That was a step forward in recognizing and certifying outstanding teachers. The AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, has always been open to this proposal. I remember the late Albert Shanker saying to me, well, if we can have master plumbers, we can have master teachers, especially if you're going to pay them more. And he invited me to come out to his national convention in Los Angeles to talk about it. President Bush and Secretary Spellings with the Teacher Incentive Fund, President Obama and Secretary Duncan, who have taken a lead on this despite the fact it's not popular with many of the constituents of their party, have stuck their necks out on this, and I applaud them for that. The Gates Foundation has put money behind it. Bill Gates has told me personally that This is one of the two things he wants to do in education with the time and the money that he's got. So there's a consensus. Not everybody might not say, as I do, it's the holy grail of kindergarten through the 12th grade, but there's a consensus that finding fair ways to reward outstanding teaching through teacher principal evaluation related to student achievement is urgently important. So it's very tempting just to pass a law in Washington and say, let's order it. Let's just do it. Well, that's not the way things work in the United States of America. You know, we did that with professional development. The law now says, with all that $2.5 billion, do it. Have professional development programs. And I don't know what the senator from Colorado thinks, but my view, and I don't think Secretary Duncan would mind my repeating his comments often, that's the biggest waste of money we have in the federal education program. It's not well used. We say do it, and so they have all these programs, and teachers know it's a waste of time, and everybody knows it's a waste of time. We're not spending that money wisely. So why are we to think if we just say create a teacher evaluation system that all across the country in 15,000 school districts, people will just say, okay, we have to do it to get the money, and they'll just do it. I think it would be the kiss of death for the whole movement. It's tempting to do it. Then yesterday, on my way up here in my little hometown of Maryville, Tennessee, I picked up the newspaper, and it reminded me of why I so strongly believe it is a good idea to create an environment in which school districts and states can create teacher principal evaluation systems, and it's a bad idea to order it, define it, and regulate it from Washington. Here's the headline, and I mentioned this yesterday in my remarks on the floor. Evaluation of teachers contentious. Now, here's the state of Tennessee. Could I ask for 3 more minutes for the senator?
I certainly have no objection. Without objection.
I thank the senator from Kansas, and I'll kind of speed up my comments a little bit. But I might take 4 unless that's the problem. But I thank the senator from Kansas because I'd like to finish my point, if I may. Remember, the state of Tennessee won Race to the Top. It's been working on teacher evaluation for 25 years. It developed the Sanders model, which was the first real way that we related student achievement to teacher performance. May sound easy, it's pretty hard. Nobody else would do it. This professor in the University of Tennessee Agriculture Department, a statistician, said, I think I can do it, and he did it, and it's being used all around the country in many places, but not every place. Some don't have confidence in it. But so Tennessee wins $500 million in Race to the Top to do what? Have a teacher principal evaluation program. So here they're doing it. 25 years of experience, and it's the front page news, evaluations of teachers contentious. All the struggles with that program. And then we get into here what it's involved. It says that under the new system, this is the Tennessee system of evaluation, tenured teachers will be evaluated at least 4 times each year. Non-tenured teachers will be evaluated at least 6 times each year. Teacher effectiveness ratings are calculated using a formula that's 50% qualitative, 50% quantitative. The quantitative portion combines student growth 35% and 15% student achievement. Now, Mr. President, they're having a tough time down in Maryville, Tennessee and Nashville, Tennessee, implementing their own proposal. It said state officials are traveling across the state to meet with stakeholders. The State of Education's advisory group will bring revision commissions to the Education Commissioner, one of the best in the country. Based on the proposed revisions, the recommendations might need to be brought before the State Board of Education. Okay. Do we really want them to come to Washington after they get through with that and say, okay, now we've got it figured out, we're having a really hard time doing it. You tell us what to do, you define what we ought to do, and may we please have your permission to do things this way instead of that way? I think not, Mr. President. I think that would be the kiss of death for any movement for teacher principal evaluation. So my plea is that we show some restraint here, that we recognize that just a little movement here makes a big difference there when we're dealing with 3.2 million teachers, when we're dealing with 100,000 schools and 15,000 school districts. Secretary Duncan, whom I greatly admire, says a comprehensive evaluation system based on multiple measures, including student achievement, is essential for education reform to move forward. We cannot retreat from reform. He is exactly right. But that does not mean we need a national school board. That's what a governor, a legislator, a school district, local people ought to be doing, working with teachers. So the NAEA and I may have the same position today on whether to have a mandate, definition, and regulation from Washington of teacher evaluation. We may agree. I can't speak for them. But what I'll be watching them now, as I did 30 years ago, and as I did 15 years ago, 20 years ago as Education Secretary, I'll be watching to see what they're doing in Tennessee. Are they making it easier for Kevin Huffman and the governor and the legislature to implement this award-winning teacher evaluation program? Or are they making it harder? So I hope we'll have a good, full debate as we move to the markup the next few days. I respect the enthusiasm of all those who want to begin a progress for teacher and principal evaluation. I would like to believe that no one wants it to move more than I do. I've watched it for 30 years. I've fought everyone who's against it for 30 years, and I strongly believe that the right way to do it is to recognize that education is like jobs. Both are national concerns. Both are of interest to the federal government, but we can't create them from here. We have to create an environment in which local people, state people can create better schools and create better jobs, and in this case, a mandate, definition, and regulation from Washington, a national school board, would be a terrible error. I thank the President. I thank the Senator from Kansas for his courtesy, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, thank you. I commend the gentleman from Tennessee for his remarks. I believe that while what happens here in Washington, D.C. is important, we really do change the world one person at a time, and it happens at home in classrooms across America each and every day. And there is no more noble profession other than parenthood than that of a teacher. And they make tremendous difference in the lives of Americans each and every day, and I commend them for that, and I commend the gentleman from Tennessee for his passion for education. I want to talk about education that's occurring at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, and I want to call to my colleagues' attention important work that's being done in the heartland to educate the next generation of military leadership at the Command and General Staff College. The CGSC is the intellectual center of the United States Army and has trained many of our nation's legendary leaders, Generals Marshall, MacArthur, Patton, Eisenhower, Arnold, and Bradley. Today, the college continues to prepare a new generation of leaders who are tasked with protecting our country from threats here at home and abroad around the world. The 21st century national security challenges we face are often complex and require cooperation of several federal agencies. It's not uncommon for officials from the Department of State to be working alongside the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Defense on the same project. From the provincial reconstruction teams in Afghanistan to responding to hurricanes or man-made disasters, the capability of agencies to work together is vital to the success of this mission. By working together and learning from previous mistakes, our government will become better prepared to keep our country safe and secure. To improve coordination within agencies tasked with the national security, the Command and General Staff College Foundation, under the leadership of retired Colonel Bob Hewlin, established the Arthur D. Simons Center for the Study of Interagency Cooperation at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas. Thanks to a very generous financial gift from Ross Perot, the center was created last April and named after Mr. Perot's good friend, retired Colonel Arthur Bull Simons, who led a rescue mission of U.S. Special Forces to free American prisoners in Vietnam in 1970. The Simons Center focuses on generating solutions to challenges often encountered when government agencies must work together. By drawing on real-world experience, the Simons Center works to facilitate broader and more effective cooperation within our government at the operational and tactical levels through research, analysis, publication, and outreach. The center is also actively engaged in working with members of Congress. Most recently, the Center has been working with the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee, of which I'm a member, and on legislation to help facilitate better communications and coordination among personnel in the national security and homeland security fields. The Interagency Personnel Rotation Act is scheduled to be considered in committee tomorrow and would give security professionals the opportunity to work alongside one another in a different agency for a period of time. The bill reminds me of the old saying, before you judge a man, walk a mile in his shoes. By giving staff the opportunity to work within another agency, to walk within his shoes, I imagine perspectives will change and cooperation will increase. If the legislation is approved by Congress, the Simon Center will play a role in implementing these policies. In addition to offering policy recommendations, the Center also partners with several organizations to host conferences focused on how to improve interagency coordination. For example, the Center recently co-hosted a symposium on interagency transition in Iraq, Afghanistan, and beyond with the Combined Arms Centers and the U.S. Institute of Peace. Conferences like these help provide senior government officials a helpful forum to further analyze ongoing challenges and develop practical solutions. I'd like to thank the Center's Executive Director, Ted Strickler, who joined the Center after a 30-year career in the State Department, for his hard work over the past year to get the Center up and running. I'd also like to recognize retired Colonel Bob Hewlin of the Command and General Staff College Foundation for his ongoing dedication to this important initiative. Under the Colonel's leadership, the Foundation has successfully supported our country's oldest and largest military staff college in its mission to educate the next generation of our military leaders. Finally, I urge my colleagues to take a closer look at the valuable work taking place at the Simon Center. We all recognize the importance of improving our government's ability to harness the strength of its various agencies. By promoting interagency cooperation, the Simon Center is helping to strengthen our national security capabilities so that our country and its citizens are better prepared for their future. Mr. President, I notice the